Welcome back to KRCB's live coverage of today's election. I'm Bruce Robinson, along with Dick Spotswood, Danielle Benton on our special issues desk, and she'll have another report for us in a few minutes. Right now, I'm pleased to introduce our first guest of the evening. Norman Soloman is joining us here at the table. Norman, thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, hey, it's a pleasure.
Now, you have translated from being a candidate in the primary to being an agitator, an observer, and I guess a sort of second-tier participant in some of the outlying races. You've continued to be active.
Yeah, well, you know, the great populist Jim Hightower says that, like in a washing machine, the agitator gets the dirt out. So I will answer to agitator for sure.
And you've been not just doing this in Northern California.
Yeah, right. I went to Wisconsin to speak out for Obama in that swing state to urge people there to support him, and that's been part of my work.
Norman, you were unabashed in the primary at Progressive, which for the uninitiated out there would be, how would we describe it? On the left side of the Democratic Party, is that fair?
Yeah, willing to fight for the Franklin Delano Roosevelt tradition.
173 votes, that's what you lost by to Dan Roberts, out of 173,000 votes cast. That's the closest race I've ever seen in the North Bay. And this would have been a very different night tonight, but for those 173 votes, you and Huffman would be a different deal entirely, wouldn't it?
Trade places.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be a different evening for me, and I suspect for him too. You know, we had many hundreds of volunteers. I received more than 25,000 votes. And most of all, it's about grassroots organizing. So when you look at it from the long term, you know, I'm not that important, and even Huffman's not that important. It's about changing the politics of the country. So it's not about money. It's about people talking about the key issues that will really determine our future as a country and the world.
In the dialogue that you had with the Wyatt Beetle candidates, it was kind of a road show as up and down the coast.
12 candidates, right?
How do you think that helped to shape the issues, to maybe help define the mood of the electorate in this particular election season?
Well, it was tough. In the North Bay North Coast District, you had half of the 12 candidates who were not serious candidates. From the get-go, there was just clearly they didn't have a ghost of a snowball's chance, so to speak. And when we had these debates, you had 12 people get a minute or two. Well, you can't say much of substance in that amount of time. But I think more fundamentally, we need to change the dynamic where money and big newspaper endorsements determine the scope of the dialogue. And frankly, with the apparent victory tonight of President Obama for re-election, I think there's going to be a potential quantum shift in the North Bay, because for the first time, we don't have to worry as progressives that Obama may not get in the White House for a second term. We know he's going to be there, and now so many policies that he has advanced that are unacceptable from a progressive standpoint, it's time for us to directly challenge them on the merits, and now I think we can do it.
Norman, isn't this a status quo election, though, if, as you say, and it's correct, the trending certainly toward President Obama right now in the election, but it's also trending toward a pretty solid Democratic majority in the United States Senate, but a more solid Republican majority in the House of Representatives. It's a status quo election. I mean, isn't the result of a status quo election nothing?
Well, it's disturbing, but in a way it's the fight of big money and the way in which both parties have, on the right-hand side, the Republicans, stood for even more reaction, more hostility to equal rights and so forth, to immigrants. And in terms of the Democratic Party, standing for the status quo, you might say. So there's a sort of a logjam there. And I think in the long term, we need to get beyond the idea that our only choices are corporate Democrats and Republicans. And this district gives us potential to raise those voices and say, whether it's civil liberties or perpetual war or deference to Wall Street or support for nuclear power or all kinds of other missed opportunities, we can fight for those principles.
So that's the word on the national scene. It is looking like a victory for President Obama, another term, and a lot of the uncertainty that was associated with that, perhaps a little relaxation going on across the district, certainly across Northern California, and maybe in a lot of parts of the country.
Yeah, well, it's a wonderful event to celebrate from a standpoint of seeing the failure of an appeal, I believe, to Fortress America, to circle the wagons, to we're all out it on our own and the heck with you if you know, keep your hand off my stack sort of politics. But at the same time, I think the status quo is untenable, that for a combination of reasons, The White House has been retained by the Democrats. But this economic downturn, this austerity, the suffering, whether you're a student at SRJC or an elderly person wondering how you're going to make ends meet, this is unsustainable economically and politically. And that's where, in a way, I believe we're in a classical conflict that the early 30s in our country had in terms of not only ideology, but more important, how do we get the job done to help people?
Norman, we're about ready to have a fiscal cliff. We know what the Republicans' position is. No tax increases. You can't make a deal with tax increase. You're a progressive, in fact, a progressive leader, I think, in the North Bay, it's fair to say. What's the progressive's position? How do we avoid the fiscal cliff, or do we?
Well, I think part of it is definitely substantial cuts in military spending. Definitely ending the tax cuts or the failure to end the extension of the tax cuts for the wealthy over $250,000 a year. Fundamental reordering into a progressive taxation so that we get more revenue from those, much more so than even President Obama has urged, more revenue from people at the top of the economic ladder, and actually sustaining through federal jobs programs the capacity to employ people. That's how we're going to stimulate the economy.
How do you get that through the House of Representatives?
Well, it's going to be very, very tough, especially with a president who keeps caving in. And that's been one of the huge failures in this country. Can you imagine FDR failing to fight against those who he called the economic royalists? We have economic royalists today, 8 decades later, but we don't have a president willing to fight them.
Well, we may be seeing a president with a little bit more of a mandate than anybody expected at this point. The most recent numbers we're seeing now have about a 70-point break in the Electoral College in Obama's favor. So that is beginning to look not the squeaker that everybody was expecting, but more of a pretty much of a mandate of, or a commitment on a lot of states to see something move forward, to not have the regressive policies that the Republican campaign seemed to be so focused on. And there's been speculation, I hope there's something to it, that without the concern about seeking re-election, perhaps Obama will feel a little bit more confident in pursuing some of these progressive ideas.
Well, 4 years ago, we had a lot of hopes as progressives for Obama. Now we have a record. And the record is, on the whole, compared to progressive principles, not encouraging at all. So we've got to add a new element, and that would be feet to the fire.
Norman, I don't mean to be facetious when I say this, but the Republicans have always said that Obama was a socialist. You're saying he's too conservative.
Absolutely.
And we've heard that from a lot of folks in this part of the world in particular. Norman Soloman, thank you very much for being with us this evening and for participating. I'm sure you're going to be an active participant in the scene for some time to come, and I anticipate we may talk with you again.
I look forward to it. Thanks to
Norman.
both. Thank you.